of an animal on a voyage of profitable discovery. His nose was an adventurous sniffing nose, a true nose, which exercised the original and proper functions of a nose noisily. His limbs were restless, his boots like hoofs. His eyes were as restless as his limbs, and seemed ever to be seeking for something upon which they could definitely alight, and not finding it. He performed eructations with the disarming naturalness of a baby. He was tall, but not stout, and yet he filled the lobby. He was the sole fact in the lobby, and it was as though Rachel had to crush herself against the wall in order to make room for him. His glance at Rachel now became inquisitive, calculating. It seemed to be saying, "One day I may be able to make use of this piece of goods." But there was a certain careless good humour in it too. What he saw was a naive young maid, with agreeable features and a fine fresh complexion, and rather reddish hair. He did not approve of the colour of the hair. He found pleasure in regarding her, and in the perception that he had abashed her. Yes, he liked to see her timid and downcast before him. He was an old man, but, like most old men, such as statesmen, who have lived constantly at the full pressure of following their noses, he was also a young man. He creaked, but he was not gravely impaired. "Is it Mr. Batchgrew?" Rachel softly murmured the unnecessary question, with one hand on the knob ready to open the sitting-room door. He had flopped his stiff, flat-topped felt hat on the oak chest, and was taking off his overcoat. He paused, and lifting his chin, and his incredible white whiskers with it, gazed at Rachel almost steadily for a couple of seconds. "It is," he said, as it were challengingly. "It is, young miss." Then he finished removing his overcoat, and thrust it roughly down on the hat. Rachel blushed as she modestly turned the knob and pushed the door so that he might pass in front of her. "Here's Mr. Batchgrew, Mrs. Maldon," she announced, feebly endeavouring to raise and clear her voice. "Bless us!" The astonished exclamation of Mrs. Maldon was heard. And Councillor Batchgrew, with his crimson shiny face, and the vermilion rims around his unsteady eyes, and his elephant ears, and the absurd streaming of his white whiskers, and his multitudinous noisiness, and his black kid gloves, strode half theatrically past her, sniffing. To Rachel he was an object odious, almost obscene. In truth, she had little mercy on old men in general, who, as a class, struck her as fussy, ridiculous, and repulsive. And beyond all the old men she had ever seen, she disliked Councillor Batchgrew. And about Councillor Batchgrew what she most detested was, perhaps strangely, his loose, wrinkled, black kid gloves. They were ordinary, harmless, black kid gloves, but she counted them against him as a supreme offence. Conceited, self-conscious, horrid old brute, she thought, discreetly drawing the door to, and then going into the kitchen. He's interested in nothing and nobody but himself. She felt protective towards Mrs. Maldon, that simpleton who apparently could not see through a John Batchgrew. So Mrs. Maldon had been giving him good accounts of the new lady companion, had she? Part 7. "Well, Lizzie Maldon," said Councillor Batchgrew, as he crossed the sitting-room, "how d'ye find yourself? Things?" he went on, taking Mrs. Maldon's hand with a certain negligence, and at the same time fixing an unfriendly eye on the gas. Mrs. Maldon had risen to welcome him with the punctilious warmth due to an old gentleman, a trustee, and a notability. She told him as to her own health, and inquired about his. But he ignored her smooth utterances in the ardour of following his nose. "Things worse than ever. Very unhealthy, too. Haven't I told ye and told ye? Ye ought to let me put electricity in for you. It isn't as if it wasn't your own house. Pay ye over and over again." He sat down in a chair by the table, drew off his loose black gloves, and after letting them hover irresolutely over the encumbered table, deposited them for safety in a china slop basin. "I dare say you're quite right," said Mrs. Maldon, with grave urbanity. "But really gas suits me very well. And you know the gas manager complains so much about the competition of electricity. Truly it does seem unfair, doesn't it, as they both belong to the town? If I gave up gas for electricity, I don't think I could look the poor man in the face at church. And all these changes cost money. How is dear Enid?" Mr. Batchgrew had now stretched out his legs and crossed one over the other, and he was twisting his thumbs on his diaphragm. "Enid? Oh, Enid. Well, I did hear she's able to nurse the child at last." He spoke of his granddaughter-in-law as of one among a multiplicity of women about whose condition vague rumours reached him at intervals. Mrs. Maldon breathed fervently. "I'm so thankful. What a blessing that is, isn't it?" "As for costing money, Elizabeth," Mr. Batchgrew proceeded, "you'll be all right now for money." He paused, sat up straight with puffings, and leaned sideways against the table. Then he said, half fiercely, "I've settled up the Brougham Street mortgage." "You don't say so!" Mrs. Maldon was startled. "I do." "When?" "Today." "Well!" "That's what I stepped in for." Mrs. Maldon feebly murmured with obvious emotion, "You can't imagine what a relief it is to me." Tears shone in her dark, mild eyes. "Look ye!" exclaimed the trustee curtly. He drew from his breast pocket a bank envelope of linen, and then, glancing at the table, pushed cups and saucers abruptly away to make a clear space on the white cloth. The newspaper slipped rustling to the floor on the side near the window. Already his gloves were abominable in the slop basin, and now with a single gesture he had destroyed the symmetry of the set table. Mrs. Maldon, with surpassing patience, smiled sweetly, and assured herself that Mr. Batchgrew could not help it. He was a coarse male creature, at large in a room highly feminized. It was his habit thus to pass through orderly interiors, distributing havoc like a rough soldier. You might almost hear a sword clanking in the scabbard. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, he began in his heavily rolling voice, to count out one by one a bundle of notes which he had taken from the envelope. He generously licked his thick, curved back thumb for the separating of the notes, and made each note sharply click, in the manner of a bank cashier, to prove to himself that it was not two notes stuck together. 570, 580, 590, 600. These are all tens. Now the fives. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. He counted up to 365. That's 965 altogether. The odd 65's arrear of interest. I'm investing 900 again tomorrow, and the interest on the new investment is to start from the 1st of this month. So instead of being out of pocket, you'll be in pocket, Mrs. The notes lay in two irregular filmy heaps on the table. Having carefully returned the empty envelope to his pocket, Mr. Batchgrew sat back, triumphant, and his eye met the delighted yet disturbed eye of Mrs. Maldon, and then wavered and dodged. Mr. Batchgrew, with all his romantic qualities, lacked any perception of the noble and beautiful in life, and it could be positively asserted that his estimate of Mrs. Maldon was chiefly disdainful. But of Mrs. Maldon's secret opinion about John Batchgrew nothing could be affirmed with certainty. Nobody knew it, or ever would know it. I doubt whether Mrs. Maldon had whispered it even to herself. In youth he had been the very intimate friend of her husband, which fact would scarcely tally with Mrs. Maldon's memory of her husband as the most upright and perspicacious of men, unless on the assumption that John Batchgrew's real characteristics had not properly revealed themselves until after his crony's death. This assumption was perhaps admissible. Mrs. Maldon invariably spoke of John Batchgrew with respect and admiration. She probably had perfect confidence in him as a trustee, and such confidence was justified, for the counsellor knew as well as anybody in what fields rectitude was a remunerative virtue, and in what fields it was not. Indeed, as a trustee, his sense of honour and of duty was so nice that in order to save his ward from loss in connection with a depreciating mortgage security, he had invented, as a town councillor, the improvement known as the Brougham Street scheme. If this was not said outright, it was hinted. At any rate, the idea was fairly current that had not Councillor Batchgrew been interested in Brougham Street property, the Brougham Street scheme, involving the compulsory purchase of some of that property at the handsome price naturally expected from the munificence of corporations, would never have come into being. Mrs. Maldon knew of the existence of the idea, which had been obscurely referred to by a licensed victualler, inimicably prejudiced against the teetotaler in Mr. Batchgrew, at a council meeting reported in the Signal. And it was precisely this knowledge which had imparted to her glance the peculiar disturbed quality that had caused Mr. Batchgrew to waver and dodge. The occasion demanded the exercise of unflinching common sense, and Mrs. Maldon was equal to it. She very wisely decided that she ought not to concern herself, and could not concern herself, with an aspect of the matter which concerned her trustee alone, and therefore she gave her heart entirely up to an intense gladness at the integral recovery of the mortgage money. For despite her faith in the efficiency of her trustee, Mrs. Maldon would worry about finance. She would yield to an exquisitely painful dread lest anything should happen, that is, to prevent her from dying in the comfortable and dignified state in which she had lived. Her income was not large, a little under £300 a year, but with care it sufficed for her own wants, and for gifts, subscriptions, and an occasional carriage. There would have been a small margin but for the constant rise in prices. As it was, there was no permanent margin, and to have cut off a single annual subscription or lessened a single customary gift would have mortally wounded her pride. The gradual declension of property values in Brougham Street had been a danger that each year grew more menacing. The moment had long ago come when the whole rents of the mortgaged cottages would not cover her interest. The promise of the Corporation Improvement Scheme had only partially reassured her. It seemed too good to be true. She could not believe without seeing. She now saw, suddenly, blindingly. And her relief, beneath that stately deportment of hers, was pathetic in its simple intensity. It would have moved John Batchgrew had he been in any degree susceptible to the thrill of pathos. "I doubt if I've seen so much money all at once before," said Mrs. Maldon, smiling weakly.